Hi, everybody. Our guest today is Professor Vishal Gupta. He is the Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. His focus area is leadership and organizational development. His recent book, Demystifying Leadership, Unveiling the Mahabharata Code, was done with his fellow author, Professor Asha Kaul, who's also a professor at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. I guess she's a professor of communications at Ahmedabad. This is an extraordinary book. Welcome to this conversation, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ram, for having me.
Yeah. This book was sent to me from India. Fortunately, came across this book. A friend sent it to me. Upon reading this book, I read this fully. I assume a lot of research, a lot of discussion, analysis must have gone before you came up with this. Can you tell me a little bit about how the idea to create a book like this emerged?
Yes, so it was the years of lockdown. So this was 2020 and 21, and at that time we were all locked in our houses, and what happened was on the national television, the government actually relayed Ramayana and Mahabharata during this time. So I think the stories were quite fresh. I come from a family which is kind of religious, and there were always talks of Gita and Mahabharata at home. Growing up, Mahabharata came on television, and I as a young boy, I had seen Mahabharata as well. So this lockdown gave you can say, a refresher course on Mahabharata. And then when one fine meeting, me and Asha, who's the co-author, Asha teaches a course on leadership through literature, where she does talk about some leadership lessons that we can derive from Mahabharata. So we happened to got talking about our interest in the epic and well, the importance of taking these lessons to the masses, and well, it just kind of ticked for both of us that this is a good project to work on. And yeah, so we enjoyed working on this, and we felt there is a use in doing this, and that is how Ram this book came out. Yeah, so we are I would say just the sheer enthusiasm to do something. We wrote this book in a period of about 7-8 months. So because we were so interested in doing this ourselves.
Okay, thanks. So I have always viewed leadership in context.
Yeah.
Or leadership exists in context. So for instance, the leadership practiced in the battlefield may be much different from the leadership practiced by someone who's running a hospital or someone who's running a not-for-profit organization. So by saying demystifying leadership, do you have one particular definition of leadership in this book, or you are addressing leadership that encompasses multiple areas?
Well, to be leadership to me is influencing people through your actions to get work done. So that to me is a very simple definition, which is influencing people. We influence people to get work done. As a leader, you don't command, you influence people to get your work done. So I think if you look at this epic, Mahabharata is actually, while the name of the war was also Mahabharata, but actually the whole epic is not just about the war. The whole epic is about build up to the war. The war was only 18 days, but the epic was right from the story of Shantanu and Ganga, Bhishma, and so on. And Pandavas and Kauravas were only the grandchildren of Bhishma. So there is this epic, and this story is actually, the war is only a very small element. The other thing you mentioned, it is about context. The whole epic is bringing out the dilemmas and bringing out the flaws and the imperfections of individuals as they navigate their life journeys. So one of the things that I always talk about leadership is, and I always say that leaders, our bosses, our supervisors, they are not gods. We are all flawed human beings. Our leaders and our bosses are also flawed beings. So they are not omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent. They also have their limitations. And why this epic is such a beautiful story is because there is nobody in this epic who is perfect. Everybody has flaws. And I think that's a beautiful thing that the epic does. And it sets the context of multiple places. How does a king rule the kingdom? How does how does a prince uh, maybe act with others, and so on. So there are innumerable stories talking about smaller context, larger context, and so on, which and showing imperfections of situations, imperfections of the individuals involved who have to take decisions, who have to make decisions. So the war is only 18 days. The epic actually talks about what was the build up to the eventual war that was fought.
True, absolutely true. I agree with you on that. And you also, the title of the book says Unveiling the Mahabharata Code. Are you suggesting that there is one particular code or a set of codes that we can take away from this book?
Well, so let me just give you a background of what we did. This book adopts a storytelling approach. So if you look at the book, there are 6 characters, and there are many stories relating to these characters. And what we've done is we've kind of identified one, not just one, but an important message that we can maybe derive from the lives of these 6 characters. And so the code, if I were to say the code, yes, we have presented it in our in the last chapter of the book, which we call as the leadership triangle. And we've talked about 6 important qualities or 6 important skills that leaders have to think about, which is starting from being mindful and managing your emotions, being not in the control of your emotions, but being able to control your emotions and being able to take the right action. So that's the uh, first important skill. The second is being able to navigate your identity, and how do you live in the world when you have your own personal values and identity, and there are social groups of which you are a part. We talk about the leadership behaviors, the importance of vision and the positive capabilities that the leaders should have. We talk about power and politics in the organization, and how does a leader navigate that. We talk about the paradoxes that occur when you are trying to work as a leader. Should you micromanage? Should you empower? How much should you empower? How much should you micromanage? That's a paradox. Should I give people freedom, but I also need to control them? So how do you manage this? So there are many paradoxes that are there that come up, and leaders need to manage those paradoxes. And finally, we talk about, which is the most demanding skill is actually being able to navigate ethical dilemmas that come up. So one is a paradox. How do you manage these paradoxical demands? But the last one, which is when you have a right versus right or a wrong versus wrong, which right would you choose? Which wrong would you choose when you have two rights or two wrongs pitted against each other? And that is again a beautiful kind of thing that this book talks about. So we have these 6 lessons and so we have presented it in a framework in the book, and that is what we call as the Mahabharata code, that all leaders should actually be cognizant about and keep in mind, because these are important issues that a leader has to grapple with.
Yeah, I did see this on the conclusion chapter where you have this triangle. In particular, I want to ask you about principle 6, where you said principle, pragmatism, balancing idealism and realism. I have a question for you later in this conversation. Now, you spoke about these characters. This is something very interesting in this book. That is, in general, books on this topic usually address the concepts and philosophies rather than the characters. Now, you chose these characters. Want to know why you went or chose this character-based approach versus concept philosophy-based approach. That is one thing. The other thing is, the reason why you chose these characters specifically, is that because you see some kind of a resemblance in these characters in the business leaders today? Please explain that a bit to me.
Yes. So the first question, which was, why did we choose characters and character approach and not the concept approach? So as I mentioned earlier too, we wanted to have a storytelling approach. So we wanted to kind of talk about stories, and because stories connect, we come from India. We have all grown up studying Panchtantra. We have all grown up studying Kathopanishads and all those Hitopadesh and Panchtantra stories. So we are a society which taught lessons telling us stories. We have all grown up hearing stories from our grandmothers, on grandfathers and grandmothers on about all these wonderful stories. So I think we were very clear that we want to tell stories, and storytelling is a wonderful way of conveying messages, and that is why we wanted. So if you read the book, the first part of every chapter is all about the stories. It talks about stories around these individuals. So we present to you about 3 or 4 stories for each character, as in how they were under different contexts. So if you take Bhishma, we talk about what happened, why did he become Bhishma Pitama, what was the vow he took, why did he took it, what were the circumstances. Then we talk about what happened in the courtroom where Draupadi was brought, okay, and what were the issues there. We talk about the final eventual war and what was the role of Bhishma there, what was happening. So it's like we create these characters in front of you, we talk about those stories, and then once you listen to the stories, we kind of work with the reader to highlight some issues that you should see in the stories. Okay, some complexities that are visible, some problems that are visible in these stories, and therefore these stories, these complexities or problems or issues need to be addressed, and how can we address them, and what are the lessons for the leaders therein. So I think that was the approach. That is what we wanted to kind of bring in. Now, why these characters? Well, Mahabharata is a huge epic. It is the longest epic in the world. It is famously said, what is there in Mahabharata is everywhere, and what is not there in Mahabharata is nowhere. So it is one of the oldest epic of India. It is the longest epic in the world. So there are many characters. When we sat down to think about what we would want to do, we could identify that, you see, there are these 6 important characters who actually kind of are the mainstays of the whole story, of the whole epic. The others, while they are important, but they were all playing what we call as the supporting cast. So if you look at Arjun, for example, so many people asked us when we wrote this book, why did you not write about Arjun? Why did you not write about Draupadi? These were questions that came to us. So the easier answer that we would tell jokingly is, well, the publisher said you cannot have a very thick book. So we had to limit ourselves. So that was the light answer. The serious answer is, if you see Arjun, Arjun was nothing without Krishna. So it was actually Krishna who was holding all the strings. Arjun was only obeying the orders that were being, the strategies that were being created by Krishna. If you look at Draupadi, yes, she suffered, but apart from that, well, she was only crying and kind of nudging the Pandavas to fight the Kauravas all the time. But so there is no big deal, or in the sense, no big deal in the sense, if you compare to the other characters, they play the supporting role, as I say, or the second task. So we found Karn, Bhishma, Krishna, Kunti. If you see, Kunti is a very strong character. Not many people talk about it. Shakuni. Many people asked us, why did you write about a negative character, as negative as Shakuni? But you see, Shakuni, if what Krishna was to the Pandavas, Shakuni was to the Kauravas. He was the counterpart. He was the counter strategist to Krishna. They were actually at the equal level, strategizing in both the camps. So Shakuni was a very strong character in the whole thing. So that was a kind of a thought we had. Important, strong characters who also show a lot of issues, flaws, and then kind of hold the epic together.
Yeah, that explains it well. In fact, I was about to ask you why Draupadi has no role in this, and thanks for explaining it even before I asked. In one of the chapters, you are talking about authenticity. I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you, or you may know this already. Authenticity, people, especially CEOs today, whether they are authentic or not, they pretend to be authentic.
Authentic, yes.
And there are a lot of leadership books, including the one by my own Stanford professor, Jeffrey Pfeffer, which discusses authenticity at length. You know, I'm sure you read his book, Path to Power. I took his course also. Do you think today's leaders are authentic? And do you think today's leaders or today's aspiring leaders will take a lesson in authenticity from this book?
Well, let me be very honest. I talk about authenticity, and I also talk about in Krishna's chapter pragmatism. So there are these are paradoxes. So pragmatism versus idealism, and so I would say authenticity is an ideal, is something that must be always kept in mind as a very important way of acting and demonstrating what you stand for. But there will always be certain situations when being authentic may actually be counter. may be actually not be the right thing. You may need to deviate from these ideals at times. Uh, so this is a difficult question actually. I would say the answer to this would be, I truly believe authenticity is very important, and there can be no better way of leading than leading by example. It is the strongest way of leading. It is demonstrating and practicing the values that you think others should practice. So it is a very important quality. Leading by example is very important, but at times as you lead, you may need to be pragmatic to see, is there a deviation that is needed? And so yes, if we were to look at 100 situations, a leader who is inspiring, a leader whom people would like to follow, would be authentic. I would say most of the times, 90-95% of the times. Those 5% of times he would think about uh, possibilities of, or the consequences of, if I actually do be authentic at this time, would it lead to the right consequence or not? So keeping the ideal of authenticity in mind, and then always being mindful and thinking carefully about where your actions may lead you to, and if there is a need, being okay to deviate as an exception, as in as possible, not as the first way of acting or behaving, but only as an exception. So it's a difficult thing to explain, but being authentic, but also being ready to be pragmatic at times. Let me say that.
The other question I have for you is pertaining to authenticity. In fact, this I am reading from your book. This is your quote. The important thing here is that these leaders chose a higher, morally correct goal for themselves and then did whatever it took to achieve those goals, even if that required deviation from the principles of honesty and truthfulness for a short while.
Yes.
In this book, are you simply describing scenarios, or are you even taking a position on certain things? For example, are you taking a position on this? Are you suggesting that if it required deviation from principles of honesty and truthfulness for a short while, it's okay to go ahead and do it? Is that what you are taking a position on?
Well, I would say we are trying to, through examples. So in the book we've talked about Abraham Lincoln, we've talked about Krishna, we've talked about Ratan Tata and the Cyrus Mistry saga that happened, unfolded in India. Through these stories, through these examples, what we're trying to say is that idealism may not always work, and individuals and leaders may have to first of all think and be very clear that the goal that they are working for is not for their petty purpose. It is not for their own individual benefit, but it is for the benefit of the society. It is for the benefit of, so in case of Abraham Lincoln, it was society. In case of Ratan Tata, it was the organization. In case of Krishna, it was to uphold the dharma, as he mentioned during the war. So I think the point here is, even a person like Krishna, who is considered to be God-like figure in India, he is considered to be equal to God. He eventually gives us this message that at times, only as a last resort, only as an exception, you may have to Be pragmatic, because your authenticity may not always lead you to the right outcome. So, but the important thing is, are you clear about the outcome? Do you know the outcome? Do you know the goal? Do you know that the goal serves others? It is not for my benefit, it is for the good of others. If you do not have clarity of the goal, if you don't know what the goal is, then be authentic, be authentic, practice the principles. But if you are clear about the goals, if you know the goals, then if there is a conflict between means and ends, or principles and outcomes, then you may need to let go of principles, because following the principle may not lead you to the outcome. And that's a choice everybody has to make. That's a choice a leader has to make. That's the messy reality we live in. That's the messy reality leaders face. So you've got to be very clear, and the lesson that we are trying to make here is, that's a very difficult thing, and that is why we've kept it as the highest skill of leadership, is to be able to navigate these conundrums, these dilemmas, which is when you are pitted against right versus right. Your outcome is right, but the principle is also right. What do? You need to make a choice, and those choices are difficult, those choices, but you will need to be aware. So I have given a framework which says, you start with the foundation is the goal, clarity about the goal. Then think about the principles. Then decide whether the principles will lead you to the goals or not. If you see that, well, this is not working, that is when you need to think about deviations, possibilities that you may need to execute in order to reach the goal that you know is for the benefit of others. But then that is the last thing I mentioned in the framework. But then be very clear that once you make these choices, once you make the choice of being pragmatic, your character will always be questioned. Your character, you will always be called as deceitful people by some. So you see, world over, what is happening, Ram, is, look at all the leaders in India. Look at Prime Minister Modi. Look at Donald Trump, who was in the US. Look at the current president. Look at the other countries. You see, when people take certain actions, there are always camps who say, well, he did this, he did this. But we should also understand that these people are facing difficult choices. They have to make these choices. Once you make these choices, your character will always be questioned. And that is a beautiful message that Krishna gives through his life. When he makes these choices, when he says, he famously declares, this is one of the most popular shlok of Mahabharata, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. It says, whenever there will be adharma, I will come and I will do whatever it will need to eradicate that adharma. Now, in that doing so, he also gives us this message: you make that choice. But then he is cursed. He is cursed that your clan will be wiped out. Your people, after 36 years, after the war ends, 36 years later, his whole clan is dead. He dies a very sad death too. But then as a leader, he decides to live with it, because to him at that moment, that goal was more important. And he in all his wisdom, he says, well, this is my goal. This is I know this, I have clarity. And I know if we were to follow the right principles now, we are not going to get to those goals. Abraham Lincoln, well, there are many documented stories, many documented stories that when the 13th Amendment was to be passed, there were many transactions that were done. There were many people who were bought and brought to the voting side, to the side which actually voted. But then he is said to be the best president America has seen, one of the best stalwarts that America has seen. So, well, he makes that choice that this is an important goal to stand for. So what we are trying to do is, I don't know if you would want to put it as taking sides. We are trying to, through these stories, put kind of some, some reasons why people behave the way they do.
Yeah. More importantly, I'm so thankful you highlighted the fact that you don't do these things for selfish reasons, but purely for the sake of helping the society or common good of the majority. That is when you deviate from these kind of things.
Yes.
The other interesting thing that I observed in your book was about the personal identity versus the social identity. Identity conflicts, identity crisis, and so on. And you're also discussing about Karna in this. You're talking about depersonalization and so on. My understanding of how social groups or social networks are formed is that people with similar identities, similar aspirations, similar personalities get together and then form social groups or social networks. Whereas in this book, you are saying some or many who join these social groups or social networks abdicate their own personal identity to assume the identity of or the general identity of the social groups.
Yeah.
So tell me, how would somebody or why would somebody give up their identity and assume the identity or become what is the average identity of the social group?
Yeah.
Give me some examples, and particularly in the management side.
That's a very important question, and to be honest, I would say that is this question is one of the things that is very close to my heart. You see, you are right. We say birds of the same feather flock together. We typically make friends with whom we want to be, right? With whom we kind of identify. So that's a easy and a nice thing to do. But a lot of times what happens is we as individuals, we also have aspirations. We aspire to belong to certain groups. So as an academic, let me tell you, I want to be, I can say I want to be with those faculty who say publish a lot and kind of they're very reputed. That could be one. As a leader in the organization, as a manager, you want to aspire to be in the top management team of your organization. You want to aspire to be with those really powerful individuals in the organization. So we like to be with people with whom we are similar, but there is also a big role of aspirations. We aspire to belong to certain groups. Now, the point that we are trying to make here is, if the aspirational group and you as an individual have the same values, have the same bearings, then it is no problem. then it's a good thing. Then it is a good thing in the sense, well, then things will be fine. But then there are many places, there could be many situations when the aspirational group practices certain values which are very different from the values that you have. So if I want to, let's say I want to be in this, my aspiration is to belong to this group of really powerful people. When you get when you get to that group, you see they do all sorts of malpractices, which you from the outside you thought, well, these are the powerful people in the organization. When you get into the group, you get to know that there are many things that are happening, which you as an individual do not indulge in. Now that is where you have a choice. That is where you have a choice is, do you preserve your personal identity or do you go along with the group? Because you aspire to belong to that group. So you start believing, practicing the things that those aspirational groups do. And I think this is a very, very important thing that leaders, individuals, I would say, starting from students, starting from young children to adults, we don't recognize that the social groups that we aspire to be, when we go along with the values that they are practicing, that may actually make us go away from who we are as individuals or who we wanted to be as individuals. And that is a big dissonance. That is a big dissonance. So you are not happy as an individual because you are doing something that you never wanted to do. And the second thing is, because you want to show that membership, you belong to that particular group, you start practicing the same behaviors and values that those aspirational groups are doing. And that is what we call, what I have written as depersonalization in the book. And the character to demonstrate this in the epic is Karn. Well, if you see Karn he is the tragic hero of the epic. We've written that in the book. He is the tragic hero. When you meet Karn, when he is all alone, there could be no better, bigger, respected character than Karn in the epic. He is called as Danveer Karn. Danveer is somebody in English. If we translate, he is somebody who would give you everything that he has, right? So he is a person who is very, very religious. He worships sun god every day morning. If anybody comes asking for something, when he is doing this puja, this worship of sun god, he never denies that person. So when you meet this man, there could be no bigger character. But this Karn, because he aspired to belong to a particular group, and that was of the kings, because he wanted to be treated as a king. That was his aspiration. Unfortunately, he chose a wrong aspirational group. And when he belongs to this, when he goes and joins this aspirational group, he does things that only a very, very bad person could do. So look at the tragedy. A person who individually is perhaps the best in the epic, when he is in the social group, when you see him with others, he is perhaps the worst. He is perhaps the most corrupted of those individuals. He does things, says things that are that not a gentleman can say. And that is where I think all of us, so the real, as I said, this is one thing that is very close to my heart. Be proud of who you are. Be very careful of which aspirational group you want to join, and choose the right groups. And if you see that those groups are not the right groups, or you made a mistake, always walk out. Be willing to walk out and say, sorry, I made a mistake. I don't want to be here. Because to me, my individual identity is more important. That is what gives me happiness.
True.
So
See, yeah, go ahead, complete.
no, I think that is the message around the identity.
Yeah, see, one is driven by aspiration and becoming part of the group, and the other one is, I'm sure you have referred to Robert Cialdini in your book, where he discusses the concept of social proof, where people become part of the group and then the group's identity becomes their own identity psychologically, but not because of aspirational reasons. So either way,
Yes.
yeah, I remember reading Cialdini's
You
book
kind of,
Influence.
yes, you basically you kind of accept it so much that you actually you forget and you let go of your individual, and then you believe that you start believing. So see, the dissonance will exist till the time you remember that you as an individual were something else and the group is asking you to do something else. But let's say you slowly and slowly over time you just let go of that individual thing, then you are comfortable. That is the slow death of character essentially. And then you are happy doing what the group is doing, and then you are pretty comfortable. You are them then. That's it.
Yeah, their behaviors become your second nature.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I understand why you found this topic to be near and dear and most favorite to you, the personal identity, social identity, because I assume as an organizational behavior professor, one, you get to observe this, you get to teach this in the class. And not only that, this is going to help the students who would be future executives, because you spoke about FOMO. If you look at the CEOs and how they behave today, everybody wants to enter the Fortune 500 club or one of the elite CEO clubs. So
Yes.
in the process, many of them indulge in activities which are sometimes borderline illegal.
Yes.
And some of them even end up in jail.
Yes.
So this is
Yes.
so crucial that you are teaching this. This is your favorite topic and you teach this to the students.
Yes, and this happens to everybody. Let me be very honest. This is a conundrum I face. Which is the group I should aspire to? Because you see, the comparisons never end. The comparisons never end. You will always have an aspirational group you want to join. Now, the point is, be very careful of reminding yourself that you are one kind. You have this kind of a individual personality. You have some identity. Those aspirational groups, are they aligned to who you are? Okay, there is no problem. As I said, there is no problem in having aspirations or having aspirational groups. The problem is when those aspirational groups make you do things that are against your own values and systems and thinking. That is where you need to be really, really careful. And very rightly, you see, today's generation is afflicted with this fear of missing out, FOMO. So keep reminding yourself that you are an individual. Okay, belonging to a particular group is fine, but your individual identity has to be preserved. Your individual, what is you should think about, how do I promote my identity rather than
I guess there is a thin line between aspiration and greed. So when aspirations become greed, that is when many may tend to indulge in activities that may not be perceived to be professional.
yes, yes,
Just have one more question for you.
yes,
That is, today in business schools, leadership is taught in multiple streams. Did you write this book for a particular audience? Do you think the students of management today are going to take lessons from this? More importantly, if some of the lessons, if they take from this book, and as entrepreneurs, if they tell their investors that they are taking lessons from this book, are they less likely to be funded? Do you think that fear may exist in the minds of the students, the future leaders?
Well, I don't know if they will be funded or not. To be very honest, we wrote this book because we thought there are lessons to be learned. There are lessons to be learned from one of the most complex stories ever written. So, and when we wrote this book, we thought that this book is a book for the masses, in the sense that somebody who is mature, somebody who is like, even somebody who's doing undergraduate, graduate studies, doing a PhD, who's now working in corporates, or who is already a leader. I think there are lessons in the story for everybody, because these are life's conundrums. This is not just a leader's problem. This is a problem that everybody faces. And we did mention, we did discuss the identity issue. That is not just leaders' issue. That is an issue everybody faces. So I think this is what we thought, that here is a beautiful story, and there are some lessons that are truly Indian. There is a story that is truly Indian. There are lessons that are that can be derived, applicable for almost everyone across the world. And so Gita, you see, Gita is a book that is not just read in India, right? We all know this. Gita is read around the world, is taught around the world. So I think the same way we thought, this is, we talk about Gita, but we also, there is, Gita was what was told just before the war was to begin. So Gita is a small part. And as I said in the beginning, Mahabharata, the epic, is everything that happens and the build up to the war. So war is a small part and Gita is a part of the war. But then there is a huge amount of backdrop that is painted to actually say and talk about all the complexities that happen. So there is a very complex story highlighting the flaws, and truly today, as I mentioned, I truly believe, and I tell everybody, that we are all flawed beings, and let us accept that, and then see what we can do with our lives. Okay, nobody is perfect. The epics shows that even Krishna is not perfect. So we've got to make choices. We have to think about situations carefully, and then see what we can do with our lives, and how can we make our lives more effective. Maybe keeping these lessons that we talked about. Even if you're not bothered about the lessons, read the stories, because there are many stories that we narrate in the book about these characters. So I think this was a book we wanted to write to highlight the beauty of our scriptures, the beauty of what is Indian, and then the lessons that can be derived for managers at all levels, students, and then would-be managers, and then practicing managers. For entrepreneurs, well, keep these lessons in mind. Keep these lessons in mind, and remember, maybe you have a small startup. Remember, you may become big in some time. Remember that the life will throw dilemmas before you, where you will have to choose between right and right. You will have to manage paradoxes. Okay, you will have to keep always remember the identity issues therein. So as entrepreneurs, remember that the life will throw many challenges. So there could be some lessons that you can pick up on the way and then work with it.
Yeah, thanks, Vishal. A couple of things I observed. One is this book is timely because our economy is growing. New leaders are emerging. The new generation of leaders are emerging. The startup culture is catching up in India. A lot of startups being launched. And students are open to pursuing entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And Indian leaders are in big demand around the world. Yes. Previously it used to be only Indian techies. Today, Indian management experts are in big demand around the world. And this is a major contribution to not just the leadership literature, but to management literature in general, I would say.
Thank you. Thank
and
you.
I only wish our students read this book because...
So I can tell you, we teach now, Asha and I, we teach this course and we have this book. And I can tell you the enthusiasm in the class is just amazing. This is a leadership through literature course. We talk about many other books, but when it comes to Mahabharata, the whole class is like, you can hear a pin drop. They are so, it's not that somebody is yawning, somebody is sleeping, and they are also engaged. They want to know about these stories. They want to know the complexities. There are many people who have come to us and said, because of this book or these sessions, they have watched the full Mahabharata on television again, on YouTube again, and on the OTT platform, wherever it is available, that they have sat and watched the entire Mahabharata to understand the complexities and those choices, difficult choices. And I think that's wonderful that people realize the richness, the beauty that our forefathers could think of and could pen down. And I think that's a great thing to kind of get our students back to, and that to us, that's our biggest certificate. When somebody comes and says, we watched the entire Mahabharata because of the discussions we've had, that there are hours together, we are sitting and watching Mahabharata and kind of seeing what you guys told us in the class.
Yeah, I am surprised, but I'm very happy that the students are taking this very seriously and watching Mahabharata. And then the other thing that I observed is, it didn't strike me when we started this conversation, this story-based approach, I guess it is going to help people with the application of some of these concepts you are talking about. If you were to blindly talk about the concepts and philosophies, I don't know the applicable value of those things. Whereas this story-based approach is going to increase the way these concepts are applied in real life.
And as I said, we are a country of storytellers, right? We have learned through story. Our first induction into life and life's lesson happens through Panchtantra. Right? We have grown up reading stories, and always at the end of the story, there was a line, moral of the story. Right. So I think we are a country of storytellers and learning through stories. So
yeah, so there are lessons in this, not just in leadership. There is, one can look at it from the psychology standpoint, or people can look at it from a decision-making standpoint, philosophy. So it's an extraordinary book. Thanks for this great work, and thanks to Professor Asha Kaul also. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.